Bulls fans are familiar with reports that people within the organization, especially in those executive offices, have had conflicting opinions in the last few years about whether or not they want to continue building around Zach LaVine. Do you see from your intel something similar going on in Detroit where they can't quite all come to terms on which of these young prospects they really want to build around and who they're willing to trade and who they're not willing to trade?
That's a good question. I really don't think it's a matter of like they're ready to, like, the majority of the front office is ready to send like a specific young guy out. Like, I don't want to get it confused that they would never trade one of those guys in the immediate future. Like, if the right player came across, absolutely they would, right? Like, I think that's like if they called Steph Curry for player X, like they would do it, like, duh. But we're talking about a different type of tier of player here. So just the vibe I get is that they wanted to build this thing the right way, and regardless of the record, I think they have done that. This was an organization that for years drafted terribly and spent money on players that just shouldn't be making the money that they make. And they reset. Whether or not it shows in the win column, like Asar Thompson is an intriguing piece. Jaden Ivey is an intriguing piece. Jalen Duren, Cade Cunningham, of course. Isaiah Stewart, like pick 19, has ended up like he's an NBA rotation player. Like, that's been the issue of the Pistons for the last 15, literally, I mean, you could go back 20 years, even when they were really good, is they don't draft well. Like, a lot of the players they draft, if you look at any position from like 2003 to as late as 2019, like, a lot of those guys are out of the league. Like, Stanley Johnson was out of the league by 30. Sekou Doumbouya, Henry Ellenson, Austin Day, Rodney, like, we can go on and on with trivia question basketball players, right? But this time around, I think they have a bunch of intriguing pieces, and they want to build it the right way. They don't want to rush if they don't have to, just because of what their record is. Um, but like I said, I don't like if the right player came across, I think they would do something. It's just, I just think they're more keen on making sure that when the right deal comes across, that they have everything at their disposal to go get that, whatever that player is. And I'm just not sure that a lot of people are ready to say Zach LaVine eating up so much of the cap is worth maybe putting yourself in a bind when that situation comes.
The one player I think that's been mentioned the most in this trade from you all has been Jaden Ivey. And I think the reason that is out of the players that you all consider the blue chip players, he felt like the one from the outside looking in that you guys were kind of lukewarm on. Sometimes you would see him not starting, sometimes you see him not playing, then you see him sometimes in the starting lineup. It seems like things are kind of progressing, better for him. What is the feeling on Jaden Ivey with the Detroit Pistons? Is it still lukewarm? Are we just wrong on the outside looking in to even be considering him? What's the feeling on him?
I certainly think that a lot of the reason the Ivy situation this season has been kind of weird, and like you said, he doesn't start some games, maybe he has a short leash. To me, it's coaching. Like, that's a coaching decision. That's not something that the front office is pushing. If we're up to the front office, Ivy would have been playing more sooner. But you guys know how this goes. Like, you can't. You hire somebody to do a job. He's new. You want to let him figure it out. Like, you can't really just step on somebody's toes there. Like, the front office is high on Ivy. Some more than others, of course, right? Like, that's just how it works. But I don't think that the Ivy made sense because it's almost like they play the same position, right? Like, so it makes sense. Like, you can't have Cade, Ivy, and LaVine. That's just probably not going to work. So I can understand why people made that kind of deduction that if they did give up a young player, it would be Ivy. But I also think that there are people in the organization who's like, why can't Ivy be as good as LaVine in 2 or 3 years? And I certainly think that's a fair question to ask yourself, and something you really need to figure out how you feel about him and his potential going forward, and weighing it versus maybe having a evolved version of Ivy sooner rather than later.
I think the Ivy thing is really interesting because, like you're saying, I mean, he's the one that has the upside. And so when you're talking about, the Bulls shipping out an all-star caliber talent, you want somebody that could come in and replace that. But, you've mentioned a couple of times here expiring contracts. Like, what, in your opinion, would be a package if you can just, like, off the cuff kind of explain, if it's not going to be Cade or Ivy or Duren or Asar, would Bojan or Alec Burks be involved? Are we talking like James Wiseman and Joe Harris? Like they've got a pick, I think, a second rounder from, it'll be like the better of Memphis and the Wizards, so that'll end up in like the low 30s. Is that something that could be on the table with a pick? Like, kind of what's like your thought process right now as far as what the Pistons are kind of looking to move out? Because if they're going to do anything at all, but I do think that they're, if they're going to use all this cap space that they have carved out for themselves, they kind of have to use it, right? Like at a certain point, letting those contracts expire to like be a player in free agency doesn't necessarily seem like it's that realistic of an outcome for them, just given where they are. So I do think in a lot of ways, like going after a big contract makes sense, but of course, like the return has to be there. So
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I agree with you. I don't think that they wouldn't give up Bojan in a deal like that. Like I think that's something that they would consider. I think more so when I was referring to the specific the talks of that trade, the blue chippers were like the pause, right? Like I don't think Bojan was as much the pause. So what is LaVine at per year? Like what does he make this year?
LaVine's at 40 this year, and it goes up like to 43, I think, next year, 45, and then 49.
So okay, you have to match 40. Like Bojan is at 17, I think. I mean, you could do Bojan.
20, so it'd be, and Burks is
he
at 10.
Okay.
Stewart's kind of difficult because he's got the poison pill, but like that could work because the Pistons don't have to take the full $40 million exactly back because they're underneath the cap right now. So it's just, there's like all these different weird kind of variables that are going on, and it's just interesting to think about it from a Pistons perspective of like, all right, what are the pieces that we can put in to make this work if we're serious about it?
Yeah, to me, I think, and I could be wrong, but like in my opinion, the offer would be Bojan, James Wiseman, get you to 32, and then maybe like like Joe Harris makes too much. I mean, it depends. I mean, if the Bulls, you could take your pick of Wiseman and Joe Harris, I guess there, and I'm sure they would throw in a second round pick or two. I think that's kind of like where they would stop, because I think like there's interest in them. Like I think they can re-sign Alec Burks, who obviously is a guy that most benches in the NBA would want, and if they feel like they can do that, I understand trying to keep him away.
Totally.
But it's certainly like I just don't think they're like I don't think they would even involve Isaiah Stewart in a deal like that, just because they're already on the fence. Isaiah's young. He's only 22. I think people forget that, even though he's been in the league. This is his fourth season. Improved from three. He's the team's best defender. I just think that they'd let them pick their assortment of expiring contracts and maybe toss in a second round pick or two. Like I kind of almost look at, and again, it's not a smack in the face to LaVine, who I really like as a player. It's just the situation, right? Like it's already out there that like the Bulls really don't have any suitors for LaVine. It's pretty clear that they play good basketball when he's not playing. They have an opportunity to kind of semi-reset, and there's just not a lot of leverage there. So I think Detroit would allow them to pick their assortment of expiring contracts, a second-round pick or two, just kind of very similar to what Detroit got from Cleveland when they traded Andre Drummond. I just think it's kind of, but maybe instead of like Brandon Knight and John Henson, they'll give you a good like veteran and Bojan Bogdanovic, right? Like to respect LaVine's like all-star prowess and top 30 player, top scoring. Like I think you'd get Bojan as opposed to two guys who would later be out of the league, but I don't think it'd be much more than that in terms of like positive assets.
We all silly like the mayor.